Hey folks, welcome to episode 11 of the Isle of Man Sport podcast. This episode is going to feature our very own Chris Quine, who is our performance coordinator down at Isle of Man Sport. So welcome Chris, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Trevor. Like everybody else, just getting on with it and trying to adapt to our new world.
Excellent. So Chris, for those that don't know you, could you give us a little bit of background to yourself, what your position sort of entails really and what it's about?
For sure. My name's Chris Quine. I work at the Safer Isle of Man Sport as sports performance coordinator. I've been in that post now since the start of 2004, so quite some time now in the role. In terms of my sporting background, I've really done sport all my life. Like most people did sport at school. Remember doing sport primary school sports and so on. I was in the school football team, school cricket team, school rugby team. But the sport that I was really drawn to from quite a young age was athletics and middle distance cross country, road running, and so on, which I kind of started in my early teens, I suppose. I was, I think, well, like lots of people, I went through my sport a few ups and downs. You know, progression isn't always a straight line. When I was about 18, 19, I really got the bit between my teeth. I was very lucky. I had the good fortune to meet someone who became a coach and mentor to me, and that was Maurice Herrier, as a former Olympic silver medalist. He lives in Port St Mary at the time. He now lives in Port Erin. And Maurice sort of took me under his wing, and I was fortunate to make some quite rapid progress. Went to a number of Island Games, lucky to win a number of medals as well at those. And by the time I got to my late 30s, I was struggling quite a lot with injuries. Interesting motivation levels was still pretty high at that point, despite doing the thing for about the best part of 20 years or more. My motivation levels were high, but my body wasn't quite as willing as it was in the younger days. And I started struggling with injuries, and I kind of more or less decided that after the 2003 Island Games in Guernsey that I was going to take a step back. I got involved in coaching for a little while, for a number of years, helped a number of athletes, hopefully helped them to do better than they would otherwise have done. But stepping aside from my own regular running, it kind of coincided with doing this job as sports performance coordinator. So it started in 2004, and the initial brief was to look after 4 athletes, part of something the Commonwealth Games Association had set up called the Britannia Squad. Those 4 athletes were Mark Cavendish, Martin Aram, Christian Varley, and Tim Neal. And it was obviously very rewarding to see that 12 years after that had started, that Mark won a medal in the Rio Olympics and Tim won a silver medal. Tim was 4th. Mark won a silver. And Martin and Christian have gone on to do other things in their lives. So that was the sort of start, really. And we've got, over time, we've built up the institute. The brief was really to support the athletes as best as I saw. It was a really broad brief. Been really lucky, have some really supportive people in Isle of Man Sport and Sport Aid to encourage me and support the ideas and sometimes challenge the ideas as well, and that's fine. But we built up the institute. We were lucky, got our the institute itself really was running from about 2005, 2006, providing physio and sports nutrition and medical support and some S&C. And then we opened our building in 2009. And there's 50 athletes, I think it is, on the Sport Aid program for this year. But since then, we've set up the Sport Aid Academy, which has got another 70 odd. And we've got another group of athletes, about 25 young people who have been previously on the academy, not on Sport Aid. So we're helping about 150 people.
Crikey. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, to think you've started effectively with a blank piece of paper. You're the first person to do this role, and the only person so far to do this role as well. So I suppose in some respects you've had a bit of artistic license to sort of take it where you think it would work best, and to see that growth from supporting just 4 athletes initially on that project to what it is today, and the amount of people who are getting support to help achieve their sport and ambitions or work towards those sport and ambitions, it must be really rewarding to see that growth and to see where it's got to at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a cliche, and lots of people would say it, but I genuinely think I've got about the best job in the Isle of Man because I love sport. I love seeing the people doing well. It's so rewarding to see, people like Tim and Mark and others who are now coming through when they've kind of arrived and at an early stage, people who come onto sport, they've reached a reasonable level in what they're doing. But it's then, can they turn that from being at a reasonable level, and have they got the drive and the ambition to take it really, really seriously? And some can't. That's not a fault of theirs. That's just perhaps they've got other things they want to do in their lives. But yeah, to answer your question, it's fantastically rewarding to see, and I feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to do what I've done, and hopefully I've done my best. I've done my best for the athletes along the line, and hopefully made a difference. One of my kind of mantras throughout has always been, well, if I was an athlete, what would I want?
Yeah.
And perhaps there wasn't always the help and the support available. You were left to get on with it. And if we can keep people healthy and keep them continuity training through, not having problems with health, not having problems with injuries, and keep them strong, then you get the progression year on year. So that's what I try to put myself in the position of the athlete, and what are they wanting to do. And we've got some really I always like using the word talented. We've got some really talented people, lots of drive, lots of ambition, a lot more drive and ambition than I have perhaps had. And that's a challenge for me to sometimes deal with those people, to kind of, because they're always pushing the boundaries, which is great. You want people who are pushing the boundaries and are constantly asking you and challenging you for stuff. And those are the people I'm sure who in the next 3, 4, 5 years are going to do great things as well.
Absolutely. I think more often than not, you find in performance sport, the ones who take that ownership of their sort of development as an athlete and sort of understand their pathway to success and the sort of milestones they have to achieve along the way, probably stand a much better chance of succeeding, having had those plans and ideas in their head. Than perhaps you can't just wing it in professional sport, really, can you?
No, it's so competitive, and there's so much going on behind the scenes now in terms of all the support that's in place. But I remember a conversation that I had with Mark Cavendish, and he must have been about 18, so it's not long into the role, and it may have been the first or second time I met him. And he sat in the office, and if you remember, it was a very small office in those days we had.
Yes.
In the upstairs, what's now the sports development unit.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know Mark, and he kind of outlined all his career of what he was going to do. So this is a young person of 18, and the only thing that he hasn't done, that he said that day he was going to do, was win an Olympic gold medal, and he's got silver, so that's not too bad. And he clearly had a direction of where he wanted to go, and lots of drive and ambition to achieve it. And when it was a bit tough going at the academy, he would just say things like, "Well, this isn't going to break me. This is what I need to do if I want to succeed, and I know I've got to be here, and I'm in the right place." And that kind of drive and that purpose is, you don't see it very often.
Which is,
there's a few who've got, the fewer sport at the minute have got it. I can see it, but clearly you're not going to get it in amongst 50 people.
Well, that's why not everyone can be the best in the world, can they?
No, and the Isle of Man has had a lot of success, and the challenge now is to maintain that momentum, to continue the success. Whilst it is hard, say if it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
It is achievable, and that's a big motivation for me. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that I've seen it done by people and seen what they need to do, and can see that it's achievable if you do the right stuff and you have the right attitude and the right mindset.
Something that always stood out to me, Chris, in conversations we've had in the past is regardless of someone's level of success in sport, a lot of the attributes and skills sets that they have that help them in sport and help them do well in sport, whether that be at regional, national or international level, they take those skills into other realms in their lives. So if they don't become the next Mark Cavendish, they may become a really good person in whatever job role they decide to take on after that.
Well, the skills that you need to succeed in sport are skills that you need to succeed in life, I guess. And a great example, it's going back into another world now, but I have used this example a few times, which was the running of the 4-minute mile, which is in 1954, that's nearly 70 years ago. And there was Roger Bannister. He ran the 4-minute mile, and he was helped by Chris Braysher and Chris Chataway, and they were all Oxford students. So Roger Bannister eventually went on to become one of the world's leading authorities as a brain surgeon. So not many of them about. Chris Chataway became a cabinet minister. He became a television news reader and a successful businessman. And Chris Braysher became a successul journalist, successful businessman. He set up the London Marathon. He established that in the early 1980s. These people, they took these other things in their lives. They ran the 4-minute mile. That was the goal they set out to achieve. And once they'd done that, Braysher and Bannister continued in athletics. Bannister stopped after that year, and he went on to do something else in his life. And as you say, though, you can just imagine the setting off the goal, which they knew was to run the 4-minute mile. They were prepared to challenge the boundaries because people said it was impossible to do. They hatched a plan as to how they were going to do it, and they went out and they executed it. But you're absolutely right. These skills, and I see it with quite a lot of sport aid people, when they leave sport aid and they go on to something else, that they do well in that, because the skills that they've got in terms of planning, goal setting, working with other people, overcoming setbacks and disappointments, these are all things that you encounter in sport. And if a young person or perhaps an older person can take those things into business or into other areas of life, then there's key skills that you need. And that's a key part of what we're doing at the academy, is trying to reinforce those skills. We've got 75 young people in the room. They're not all going to be the next Mark Cavendish or the next Tim Neal. But they might be good at something. Hopefully they'll be good at something, whatever it is. As long as they can be the best they can be and fulfill their potential, you can't ask any more of a young person than that. For anybody to fulfill your potential. Absolutely.
And I suppose that sort of brings us on to the sort of challenges we're experiencing at the moment. Obviously, as we're recording this, we're probably 5-6 weeks into lockdown with COVID-19. People aren't, sport has come to a standstill, and we've got a lot of athletes at the moment who have got all this energy to burn, probably driving themselves stir crazy not being able to do their sport. And for us as an organisation, Ireland Sport, that support, I suppose, is having to adapt with the situation as well. So can you give us a bit of a background as to how things are changing through COVID, Chris?
Yeah, well, as you say, Trevor, the sport itself is stopped, and I would say it's going to be some time before it's starting properly. Now, for some people, they can more or less continue their training as normal, probably up to 80-90%. You can still go out for a ride on your bike. You can still go out for a run. For those who require specialist equipment, for example, swimmers is the ones I perhaps most feel sorry for. because they can't access the swimming pool. I have seen a few things online where people have got little paddling pools in their garden and stuff like that, so they've been very ingenious. Anyone requiring technical coaching, technical equipment is going to struggle. Our approach has been to try and help people to adapt to their world in terms of encouraging them to adapt a routine for themselves, whatever that routine may be, and also to try and help people kind of stay in the game, because it's going to be tough. If you've trained all winter through the pouring rain, the wind, and we know the Isle of Man's not got the best climate in the winter, and you've been aiming for a big event in, let's say, in May or June, and all of a sudden someone says in March, early April, sorry, that's cancelled. That's pretty soul destroying. You're in good shape, you're ready for it. We had athletes who were comparing for the Olympic trials. So we had a number of people going to Olympic trials in swimming. All those early morning starts, the dark mornings, getting up and down the pool. So very, very soul destroying for people, very demotivating. So our aim really is to try and help people adapt to a routine, try and keep them in the game. And we've done that in a number of ways by reaching out to them to just check everybody's okay, encouraging our coaches to help people do perhaps some exercises at home. Some have obviously got their sports coaches who they're in touch with, and some of the sports are laying on online sessions, online coaching as well. Our physiotherapists are doing remote sessions as well. Clearly, it's not ideal, it's not hands-on, but it's certainly a lot better than doing nothing. Helping the athletes to stay motivated. At the minute, I think the uncertainty is tough. We've probably gone through a little bit of it's almost a grieving process, isn't it, for what you've lost, which is potentially your season or perhaps even your sports dream. You're aiming to go to the Olympics and you're 3 or 4 months away from that, and it's something you've been working for 10 years. And someone says, well, it's going to be on next year now. Well, it might be on. We're hoping it's going to be on. That's creating an awful lot of uncertainty, and everyone's going to find that tough to deal with. Other people have got professional contracts. They're riding for teams, perhaps, or playing for a sports team. A year-on-year contract. Those teams are relying on sponsors. So do you know, are the sponsors going to be in place next year? Business is going to have it tough. That's evident. Perhaps the first thing that a lot of companies will look at is, well, do we really need to be investing that money in that cycling team or that rugby team or whatever it might be? So there's going to be all sorts of ramifications further down the line. Even once we get through the initial, well, can I get into a training routine? Can I stay fit? After the initial acceptance, because you need to go through an acceptance that event I was training for isn't going to happen anymore. So why am I killing myself day after day? My advice to anyone would be to keep fit in a sporting context. Keep a reasonable level of fitness. Perhaps don't take it that seriously in terms of you don't have to do every session that you've got to do, but keep a good level of fitness. So when it restarts, you're in a good position. You've got a good level of fitness and you're mentally strong rather than mentally destroyed. But also use the opportunity, and we've been encouraging the sport aid people to use the opportunity to perhaps learn stuff that they haven't been doing, maybe some psychological skills. Maybe if you're a cyclist, if you haven't already, maybe learn to speak another language. So if you're in an international team, you can go off and live in another country to expand your opportunities. So people have got time on their hands, from what I can see, or a lot of people have got time on their hands. So how can you use that to both occupy yourself so that the day isn't too long, and also put yourself in a strong position going forward? When normal returns, whatever normal looks like at that point.
Normal might be very different as well when things return.
Yeah. No, I think the way the world was before, clearly things are always changing in the world, with technology and so on. I think the situation that we found ourselves in has accelerated that technology. So for example, the other day, we had our support team at the institute. We had a first time ever we had a meeting by Zoom, and that's opening up opportunities for the practitioners to perhaps work more closely on a remote basis with athletes. So, if an athlete's away at an event, maybe in another country, why can't they sit in the hotel room and have a chat with one of the support team, maybe about stretching program or about some psychological issues, or about what they can eat because they found themselves in a hotel and they don't know what to have, and they could do that sort of thing. And I think whilst it's always existed, those opportunities have always existed for some time, then it's kind of illustrated actually this is really easy. And as a team, we could it's quite a big event to bring everybody together. We tend to meet about once a quarter. Well, maybe we can meet once a month for a shorter meeting. So as everyone can sit at home, you can sit in your living room, sit in your kitchen, dial in for half an hour. Like, how's everything going? Any issues? Blah 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 blah, and away you go. Whereas at the minute, it's quite a big event, say, to bring everybody together. It uses up an evening, so you don't want to do that too often with people. It's using up their goodwill. So it's opening up other ideas. And I'm sure the athletes are finding that as well in terms of how they work with their coaches and so on. And you've got to embrace those opportunities and seek them out and see where they are.
For sure. I mean, quite often adversity brings out new opportunities, new birth, and ways to grow and new skills to learn. Like we say, we usually would do the podcast recordings in person, and obviously I'm at my house, you're at your house. We're learning to record through Zoom, so fingers crossed this will work. And we can get it out there for people to listen to. And it also makes me think back as well to some of the speakers that we've had in the past at various events that we've run. So if you cast your mind back to 2018, we had a gentleman called Andy Grant come to the Isle of Man. And Andy was a former Royal Marines commando, and throughout his life he's experienced lots of different periods of adversity. Initially, he lost his mum when he was only 12 years old to leukemia. Terrible thing for a young lad to have to live through. Absolutely horrendous. And he then went in his early teens, decided to pull out of doing A levels and wanted to go to the Royal Marines Commando after seeing the advert on the telly and looking at it. I think the advert used to say, what was it, less than 1% need apply or something like that, because it was such a tough challenge to get into the Royal Marines. So he went in, got his green beret. He's in the Royal Marines on patrol in somewhere in Afghanistan, and next minute he encounters an IED and is blown up. So he's then no longer Marine. He's still got his body is relatively intact, but his leg doesn't want to work. So he has to. It's giving him loads of pain. He then has to make the decision himself to sort of have his leg amputated. But what really astounded me with Andy is his outlook on life, and I think he's got this mantra of life is 10% the situation you find yourself in, and 90% the actions you take to deal with that situation. So, since deciding to have his leg taken off, Andy's then gone on and achieved some fantastic things. I mean, he learned how to surf with one leg. He'd never surfed before. He goes off, he climbs mountains. He become the fastest man in the world to run 10 kilometres as a single leg amputee. So it's quite inspiring to see. And obviously the whole world is experiencing a level of adversity at the moment. And I think if people can take Andy's mantra on as much as possible, it'll hopefully help see them through a difficult situation in a dark time. And obviously mental health can be a massive issue during this social isolation, and I think it's a real time to make sure that we're all out there helping each other and supporting each other as well. So it's great to see Sport Aid are adapting their approach to supporting their athletes during this time, and hopefully they can come through and find that the adversity might help mould and shape them into better versions of themselves as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the technology if this had happened 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have had the technology that we have now to deal with it. So I think that's kind of fortunate that the technology is here, and we're able to use it, you say, and keep in touch. And we can both sit at home and have a conversation like this. I think that thing about dealing with adversity is massive. There's quite a lot of research out there about people who have had setbacks, and you mentioned about Andy Grant there, and he lost his mum at a young age, which is, I think for the vast majority of people, it's something that's unimaginable of how you would deal with that. But I read something, and I can't remember the numbers, so don't call me if I'm wrong, but there's something like about, I don't know, eight American presidents have been orphans. There's a whole list of successful people who lost parents at a young age, and they're people who perhaps have a different perspective, had a different perspective on life, and they really kind of grab it, and because they realize how fragile it is, and overcoming setbacks. So in a way, to hear that sort of story about the likes of Andy, and I did go through his talk at the time, and it was, as you say, it was so inspiring that for people like that, it's not a surprise that they kind of grab life and just give it all they've got. This is the situation that we now find ourselves in. I think is something that's unimaginable for most people, because I mean the vast majority of people now haven't lived through wars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Grandparents lived through wars. And when I was younger, people still talked about the war. Older people still talked about it. It was quite sort of reasonably fresh in their minds. So people came out of a world of rationing, of wars and rationing, and so on, and austerity. And for the last 40, 50 years, things have been relatively prosperous. There's been ups and downs, and there's been hardship for people. But we haven't had anything that really threatened our existence. And that's, I guess, where we are now, and threatened our way of life. So, hopefully it will allow people to take on perhaps a different perspective. And I don't want to sort of criticize young people, but perhaps there is a generation, there is lots of criticism about millennials and stuff, isn't there? And they haven't perhaps had that hardship. Everything's been relatively easy, and it might be in the longer term that this gives them a different perspective on things, so that they can so I don't want to be too critical of people, because that's the environment that they found themselves in, where life is generally pretty prosperous, for the majority of people. Generations before, they didn't have a toilet in the house. 10 kids, the families living in a 2 up, 2 down, and stuff like that. So life has changed a lot for the better. If you haven't experienced that hardship, it's probably quite hard to imagine. So I think we can hope that we'll end up with perhaps a more resilient population as a result of all this, and perhaps people will appreciate what they've got, because it's easy to take stuff for granted, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Nice.
It's like it makes me think of injuries as well, Chris. That you take your body for granted until you can't use it how you would normally use it. So going back to your example, I mean, how did you feel when you found that your body wasn't able to do what your mind wanted it to with athletics? It's frustrating.
It can be frustrating, and in a way, I not really to talk about kind of my running career too much, but I'd had quite a lot of injuries on and off, and what I found was they became more frequent, and they took longer to get over. And in the end, when you get a bit fed up, right, and you train, I was injured, my leg was sore, or just that and the other, so it does become quite demoralizing. Where were we, Trevor? I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Well, I suppose it's more around talking about coming out of poor situations and finding new birth and new growth out of that, isn't it? And molding our behaviours to help us to improve and get better, really.
I can think, I had a spell in my mid to late 20s where I was quite ill for a year. I had something probably would be kind of akin to like chronic fatigue, and I couldn't run for the best part of a year. And once I came out of that and found some way forward, it kind of gave me a bit of a new lease of life.
Mm-hmm.
For several years. A kind of renewed enthusiasm, because you kind of realize what you might have lost. And up to that point, you probably just took it for granted. Your
Yeah.
health, you do take it for granted, don't you? The fact that you're not getting too many injuries when you're young, you take it for granted.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I still go out. I haven't been so much lately. Still go out for a run, and sometimes you just think, oh, it's just great out to be out running today. It's a nice day and the sun's shining, and I'm not training for anything, but it's just the joy of going out for a run. And sometimes you're running along, you've got a smile on your face because it's like, it's good today.
Absolutely.
But it's easy to take it for granted when you're younger, because we all think we're indestructible, don't we? And
definitely.
You don't see those things. So, hopefully, I think people are learning to adapt to the situation. We'll find new ways of doing things, and we'll come out stronger. You've got to be positive. Some people may find other stuff to do with their lives. They may decide that they don't want to get back swimming or cycling or running or whatever it might be that they're doing. And this is an opportune moment to focus on something else, maybe on some of their studies or whatever it might be. And for others, they'll kind of realize that I really missed that, and give them a renewed kind of outlook. Your time's limited. If you're in your mid-20s, as a sports person, you've got a limited shelf life. If you're really, really lucky, you'll get 12, 15 years at a high level. Probably most people, it's a lot less.
When we're coming up to the sort of half-hour mark there, Chris, so we'll probably start rounding things up. But we have some really good insights there into sport aid. It's sort of how it's sort of been shaped and developed over the years, and sort of looking through some of the challenges that we're facing at the minute, and perhaps how we might come out of it in a better place in some respects as well. So I think looking to the future now for sport aid, are there any other sort of opportunities do you think that we might be looking to take advantage of, or any other ways to develop?
Well, I think one of the things we have to sort of see is how things pan out after. So once normal returns, so one of the things I've been thinking about is, events for next year are cancelled. Some events cancelled this year, will be on next year, and there's going to be a kind of knock-on effect. And we don't know what that's going to be yet. So it's kind of alluded to earlier, there's talk the Olympics might not even happen. So what will happen if the Olympics don't happen?
Yeah.
What will happen if they do happen? Because there's going to be events knocked back and so on. Sponsors may fall by the wayside. Governing bodies are reliant on subscriptions from people doing their sport. They're reliant on sponsors. So what's going to happen to those governing bodies? So there's lots of uncertainty at the minute. But there will be opportunity, because not everybody will stick the course. The standards may drop for a couple of years, because if you haven't been able to train properly, you haven't been able to focus on your training properly, you haven't been able to compete, the standard isn't going to be as high. So
that's a very good point.
That may give people more of an opportunity.
Level the playing field a little bit.
Yeah. People may who were coming towards the end of their career, that may accelerate. Well, I can't go back through this for another 2 or 3 years. So they may fall by the wayside. So there may be opportunities perhaps for international representation that weren't previously there. Maybe. There are negatives. What's the impact going to be in lottery funding? People aren't buying lottery tickets like they were. So lottery tickets fund a lot of sport. They fund a lot of sport in the Isle of Man. They fund a lot of sport in the UK.
Yeah.
So if lottery tickets stop being bought, and somebody quotes to me that sales have gone down by about 50%, then that's going to have an impact on sport as well. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty and unknowns.
For sure.
But there are, as you kind of alluded to, there are opportunities out there. I would say the opportunities are the fact that standards will decrease, because people won't be able to train. It will accelerate the retirement of some people.
Yeah.
Some of your competitors will stop, and some, either because they're too old and we're only going to give a couple of years anyway, so
Yeah.
it's going to stop at the Olympics or whatever, so you might as well, all the Commonwealth Games, I'm just going to stop now because it's just too long to keep going. And some will kind of lose interest because they won't be able to maintain the levels of motivation, might not be able to sustain it financially, might have to go and get a job, perhaps, or studies, or find themselves wanting to do more studying, and their commitment to sport may reduce. So I think there will be opportunities that way for people.
Yeah.
So my advice to everybody is to stick the course as best as you can. Put yourself in a good position for when things do restart, with both training and then competition as well.
Some sage advice, that for sure, Chris. Thank you very much. So we'll close things up there, Chris. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been fantastic to get that insight. Really appreciate it. But before we sign off, I mean, we've signed off on a bit of a positive note there with that, hope for the future, stay in the course, and trying to keep ourselves in a good place for when things restart. It would be remiss of me not to draw people's attention to some of the positive stories as well that have taken place recently. So we've had the sports awards, our very first sports awards online through YouTube. So if anyone listening to this didn't get to see the Isle of Man Sports Awards this year, all is not lost. You can go onto our YouTube channel and you can find the sports awards recordings there, and you can have a look at what happened and look at some of the real positive success stories of what a lot of athletes got up to during 2019. So go along and have a look at that. You'll also find, if you go to the Isle of Man Sport website, you can also find the Andy Grant talk that we were talking about earlier. It took place at UCM, at University College Isle of Man. So isleofmansport.com, and you can find not only that, but a whole host of other talks and workshops as well. So take advantage of the technology that's out there, folks. Have a look at all the different brilliant educational resources that are out there as well. So, Chris, any final comments before we sign off?
Well, just one thing really, Trev. I've really enjoyed our chat this morning, so I hope that the people listening to it find it to be of interest. I did want to give a bit of a shout out to some of our aid recipients and support staff who are working in the health service as key workers. And I hope I don't miss anybody off here, but we've got Kim Dean, who's working at the hospital in the Isle of Man, and Jenny Newbury, who's working as physiotherapist in Sheffield. We've also got Laura Kinley and Rachel Franklin, who have been redeployed from their jobs at the National Sports Centre to work at the hospital as well. I also know that Catherine Reid is working in Loughborough in the supermarket there as well to help keep people fed and watered. So they're all working, say, as key workers, as well as doing their training and trying to keep as top class athletes. They're doing that as well. And a couple of our support team are also working at the hospital. Ruth Cool, who's a senior physiotherapist, and Hannah Crawford, who's a dietitian as well. So they're still working in the service. So I think we should recognise the great job that they're doing, not just people training for their sport and supporting sport, but supporting the community as well.
Fantastic. No, absolutely key that we recognise the efforts of these people, because quite frankly, without them at the moment, we'd be in a far worse situation than we're already in. So it's great to see these people who are out there doing these fantastic jobs and still also finding time to try and invest in themselves as sports people, or to support our sports people who are on sport aid as well. Yeah. So absolute credit to them all. Thank you.